Hello and welcome to another version of Lightest and Best, where we look at the lightest and best offerings from a variety of knife makers. And today we're going to look at the Rike 1508, which is the lightest and best integral knife. And there's two ways to say integral. You can say integral or integral, and both are correct, so you can do it either way. What it is a knife handle that is made from a solid piece of material. In this case, it's titanium, but as you can tell, there is no back spacer, there are no barrel spacers, there are no screws. The knife handle is basically one piece of titanium, and they come through here with a blade and they hollow it out. They cut a place for the lock bar. The clip, of course, is added on secondarily. But the entire handle, with the exception of the clip, is just one piece of titanium that they mill and they fashion and they fabric. And I think the concept is very interesting. It leads for a much more stable knife. Certainly your centering ring won't get off because you don't have your screws adjusted just right. As you can tell, the centering on this Rike 1508 is perfect. The 1508 is not the lightest knife that Rike has ever made. They made a very small mini knife. It had a 1.5 inch blade, a 2-inch handle, but it wasn't a handle that you could get a 4-finger EDC grip on. So this is the lightest and best of their EDC size 4-finger grip knives, and it is the lightest and best of the integral knives, of all the ones I could find anyway. As of May of 2017, the time of filling of this production, the retail price on the major providers was $425. I purchased my particular one on a mass drop, which was for $370, saving myself $55. I'm going to put up a picture and we're going to go over what exists in the integral market or the integral market, and we're going to start at the heaviest in the custom knives. Brown Knives makes parabolic, which is 3.6 inches, and you'll find a theme that most of the integrals, with the exception of Lion Steel and Rike, made very long blades and very heavy knives. The Dalibor Bergman knives, Droco has a 3.5 inch blade and is over 8 ounces. The Dalibor Bergman knives Sirius is 3.5 inches and has a 8.26 ounces. The Lion Steel SR Run, which is the first one that came out from Lion Steel, is 3.7 inch blade and weighed 5.6 ounces. The Rike Thor, now there are 2 or 3 versions of the Thor. The one I saw has a 3.75 inch blade and weighed 5.4 ounces. And then the Marfione Annex is 3.25 inch blade also, weighs 5.3 ounces. The Re8 Tashi Baruka Future is 3.75 ounces and weighs 5.3 ounces. The WE 702 has a 3.75 inch blade again and is 5.1 ounces. The Custom Knife Factory Tegral is 3.6 inches on the blade and weighs just a little under 5 ounces. The Spyderco Nirvana is 3.74 inch blade and weighs 4.81 ounces. Then the Rike 1507 is a 3.75 inch blade and weighs 4.1 ounces. So for that length of a blade, it's a very narrow, light, but it's still not as light as their 1508, which is what we are examining today. And the Lion Steel SR2A is 3.07 inch blade and weighs 3.81. The Rike 1507 has a 3.75 inch blade and weighs 4.1 ounces. The Lion Steel SR2A has a blade length of 3.07 inches and weighs 3.81 ounces. And the knife that we're examining today, the Rike 1508, is a knife with a 3.25 inch blade and weighs 3.77 ounces, which is the lightest and best of the integrals. Well, we'll go ahead and formally do the specifications. The knife blade length is 3.25 inches. The handle length is 4.45 inches. And the total knife length is 7.625 inches. The weight of the knife, as I've mentioned, is 3.77 ounces. I have some comparison knives here to look at. One of the knives that looks very similar to it is the Shirogorov Neon. It has a very similar shape blade and length blade. The handle on the Rike is a little bit longer than the Neon. We're going to compare now the Curtis F3, which has a similar length blade and a similar length handle as well. Then there is the Spyderco Native 5, which is a little smaller than the Rike 1508. We have the Lion Steel TRE, which is a bit smaller than the Rike. And then lastly, we have the Alamic Wayfarer, which has a little bit longer blade, I believe, and a little bit longer handle. And those are the comparisons so you can tell about approximately what size the knife is. The blade of the 1508 is made of M390, and as you can tell, it's right here on the lock side, M390, so that's a very high quality steel with high toughness. It has a full fat ground up to the swedge, and as you can tell, there is some swedging on the top. They taper off the swedging before it gets to the tips, so as you can tell, it gets a little narrower here and then has a nice thickness once it gets to the tip, so it has a very strong tip. Notice that the lower angle of the swedging of the blade comes and makes a nice transition into the main line of the knife handle, so it looks like there was an attempt to make some artistic continuity there. I appreciate that. On the proximal back spine, there's jimping for your thumb. It has good traction, but it doesn't hurt your thumb. The blade is bead blasted, and the sharpening ricasso falls perfectly at the grind line of the blade so that you have a consistent thickness of your edge all the way to the very end. It should be an easy sharpening knife. The lettering on the show side shows the manufacturer's name, Rike Knife, the model number, RK1508S, and then the number of the knife, which on this instance is 173. On the lock side, it has the type of steel, which is M390, and those are the only markings on the blade. With very small lettering, the blade is otherwise sterile. As far as the maker's mark, the only maker's mark exists on the show side pivot, the Rike Knife maker's mark, and then on the back spine it has the maker's mark again. And other than that, the knife is sterile except for the beautiful milling and fullering that they have on the knife. The method of deployment of the knife is by flipper, and it has mild jimping on the flipper, as you can tell, and the jimping is high enough up so that you can grab it well. The deployment on the knife is about 60 degrees, more or less. The handle, as I've mentioned, is an integral or an integral handle, which means that it's fashioned out of one piece of material, in this case titanium. And I just want to point out that even the stop pin is integral to the knife. They just milled out the material around it. And this is a stop pin that closes it and then catches it when it's fully closed too. It's both catches it open and catches it closed. So that takes a lot of precision. Some of the other knife makers will have a stop pin that has different thicknesses of sides so that whenever they get blade play, they'll just move it a quarter turn, and then this other side is a little thicker, and then they take out the blade play. But they have an over travel stop with a steel lock insert to avoid having any changes in the wear down of the lock face. The handle is anodized titanium, as you can tell. This knife comes in a variety of colors, just like a bag of Skittles. I picked out the gold one with the purple, and I call it purple because the color changes. You can tell, look at the pivot collar. When you look at it straight on, it looks blue, but then if you turn it to the side a little bit, I don't know if you can appreciate that, it turns color a little bit, looks more purple. And the same with the milling here, as you can tell. If you look on this edge, it looks a little blue, and then as the light hits it here, it turns a little more purpley looking, and then it clears to a blue again. So however they did that, they created sort of a purple mixture color. Now if you look at the interior, and they anodized even the material, I'll try to be able to display this, it's more of a pronounced purple and not so much of a purple, and it's just beautiful. It's nice that they would anodize even the interior because they can't separate these scales. They had to, I don't know how they did it, but they covered it all and then got the purple down in there somehow with electricity, I guess. So it's a wonderful accent color. I just want to point out that there is a lot of milling. They have these 0.5 millimeter fuller lines, milling lines here on the edges, on all 4 corners, and then they have 6 fuller grooves here. And there's a consistent pattern onto the clip also. And they did a lot of machining to this. Just on the show side, we have so many different planes that this is machined on. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different planes, just the show side. And the back side has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different planes. And the clip side is equally as complex. And so that gives you the highest height in the middle of the knife. And so even though it's very geometric and futuristic looking, it tends to be rounder, and so it gives you some great ergonomics. It feels like you're holding on to a stick because it's rounded because of all the milling that they did on the handle. The pivot runs on caged bearings and is very smooth. Note that the pivot collar is cam-shaped, and this is the show side, and it's cam-shaped. And they did it on this side too, and the pivot collar acts as an over-travel stop and catches the lock bar with the lock bar insert there. Other knife makers have done this well. I just want to show you the Curtis F3. It has an oversized pivot collar, and its pivot collar offers protection as an over-travel stop on the Curtis F3 too. I love it whenever knife makers do that. It's a great design. Okay, moving on, the lock bar. It has a steel lock bar insert. This is different in that the steel lock bar insert is placed externally, and not many other knife makers choose to do that. I'm going to show you how most knife makers do it. I'll get the Lion Steel TRE first of all. As you can tell, it is placed internally, and then the normal titanium goes up here, and then the lock bar is placed internally. But on this one, it's placed externally, and it totally goes over the lock bar, so everything that touches is hardened steel. On the TRE, for example, you have a little bit here that would be titanium, even though the part that interfaces with the blade is the hardened steel. I'll show you the Shirogorov also. It's got a they fix their lock bar from the inside, but it has a lock bar insert also that is from the inside, and just most knife makers tend to do it that way. There are relief cuts on the interior of both the lock bar and the handle, so when you need to disengage the blade, it's easy to disengage it. There aren't any sharp edges, and it's easy to get your thumb in there to disengage it. It's a well-designed knife. The pocket clip is a 3D milled pocket clip. I just want to bring attention to the consistent aesthetic theme that the maker had. On the back, they have these 3 holes, and initially in some of the first models, they put 3 holes up here on top too. I saw some of the prototypes, and they had 3 holes here, and then 3 holes here, and they hide the lanyard hole, and it just looks consistent with the other marks. But anyway, they put 3 holes on the clip also to kind of tie it in with the handle, and the 0.5 millimeter milling lines that they have all on all 4 corners of the handle. They continued this theme onto the clip as well, so it's consistent artistically. I just like it when they do that. Lots of other makers have done that as well. I want to bring up the Browse Razorback. Love this knife. Doesn't that have a pretty blade? But anyway, the clip, they match the artistic theme. They have this line arcing through the course of the show side of the blade, and on the clip side, they had the same arcing line, and they continued that line onto the clip so that it's consistent artistically. The theme continues throughout the knife. Also, I would just want to brag on Olamic, their Wayfarer Acid Rain. They have these different size holes that they drilled in the show side, and then on the clip they continued that theme. They have different size holes on the clip so that it ties in with the scale of the knife also. And that's what Rike did with this. They put the holes and the milling, and they continued the same 3-hole and then 1/2 millimeter milling onto the clip. And I just appreciate that attention to detail that the artist did whenever they developed the design for this knife. The ergonomics on the knife are really good because of the extensive milling. It makes it more rounded than the average knife, and you also get some grip with that little milling there too, as well as the jimping that it has. The action is super. It flips great. As you can tell, there's about a 15% lockup. It's got an early lockup, and it centers perfectly. And because there aren't back spacers or screws, you don't ever have to worry about it getting out of center like other knives would. So what do I think about the Rike 1508 knife? I absolutely love it. It is the lightest and best integral on the market today. Are there opportunities for improvement? Wow, this is an excellently made knife. I just want to mention one characteristic of integral knives that are inherent to integral knives, and that is I fear disassembly. Because they don't have scales that you can take off, basically, I like how the pivot design is. It has a captive pivot because it's not round, it's cam-shaped, and so you only have to hold a driver on one side in order to disassemble it. But you disassemble it, and you punch the pin through, and the pin falls out, and then you remove the blade and the bearings. You clean everything up, but you have to put the bearings back in their races, and then you can't put it like that because the top bearing would fall down. You have to hold it like this, and you hold your breath, and you try to slide the blade in, and you have to get it just right, and then you replace the pivot pin, and it's just a very delicate procedure, and it's probably a little more complicated than disassembly of the regular knife. Plus, you still have to just get a Q-tip and clean out the inside, which you don't even really need to disassemble it. You would only need to disassemble it to clean any gunk out of the pivot. So anyway, I just fear disassembly. I haven't had it long enough to clean it, but ultimately I'm going to have to get the courage up and disassemble and clean it after I own it for a period of time, I assume. But what do I like about the knife? This knife is the lightest integral knife on the market, and it is solid. It's made of high-quality materials. They used M390 for the steel, which is one of my favorite steels in the world, and the handle is solid titanium, which is anodized. They spent a lot of love on this knife. They did extensive milling, all 4 corners of both the show side and the scale side. They have fuller grooves, and they did extensive anodizing also. I love it too that they have a common aesthetics theme. The bottom of the chamfering of the blade goes and almost seamlessly meets the main line of the handle of the knife. And then on the clip side, as well as the handle, they have the theme of the 3 holes and then the 1/2 millimeter milling, which exists both on the handle and on the clip. So someone really cared about the aesthetic theme of the knife. So in summary, if you want the lightest and best integral knife with high quality materials, extensive milling, and a common aesthetic theme, you might want to get the Rike 1508. It's the lightest and best integral knife on the market today. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next lightest and best video.